I see y'all are as excited as I am, but feel free to make some noise for yourselves for being here. I see you, my boy. You look good, my guy. We've been waiting 5 decades for this. 5 decades. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get him out here. First up, he is one of the brilliant designers who helped shape the iconic look and feel of the Star Wars universe. His concepts were instrumental in creating the worlds, the characters, and the vehicles we all love. You'll see some of his work on display at the museum. Put your hands together for Academy Award-winning artist and production designer, Chiang. He's written and directed some of our favorite dark fantasies. Films including Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water. He's the visionary bringing back Frankenstein to life later this year. And he's one of the museum's incredible board members. So please give it up for 3-time Oscar winner, Guillermo del Toro! He loves you too. Now, few creators have impacted the last 50 years of storytelling like this next man. He revolutionized filmmaking, not just through spectacle, but through a deeply human lens. His magnum opus, Star Wars, has shaped our lives for generations and taught us we should trust our instincts. One person can change the course of history, and the Force is always within us. His imagination has lit the path for generations of fans and filmmakers alike. He's the reason we're here today. Please welcome for the first time ever at Comic-Con, give it up for the one, the only, George Lucas! Gentlemen, come on! Love you, George! Welcome to our audience. Welcome to our panel. Sorry, what does 50 years of love sound like? Silence! Excellent, excellent. What does 50 years of love sound like? Silence! Just checking, just wanted to make sure George has that on the clip if he needs it. All right, I feel so lucky somebody picked me to be sitting here, besides being a sci-fi nerd myself. I'm just so happy to be here to support 2 of my closest friends, George and his wife, Melody. This is such a historic moment, not just because it's George's first time at Comic-Con, not just because he brought the big guns with him, but because this is the very first time George has done a personal show and tell of the new museum, the new Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. This place, it is incredible. It's chock full of pieces that George has been collecting over 50 years. I'm talking original character sketches, original matte paintings, illustrations. So watch very closely because this little video you're about to see for the very first time, we're revealing some of those pieces that'll be on display. So, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to give to you the first sneak peek. Narrative art is storytelling through visual media. Cave paintings, comic books, graffiti, illustrations tell us a story. They evoke emotion in a way that goes beyond words, whether it's a $5 sketch or, off the street, or a $5 million painting at the Met. Each one is equally valuable because each one of them helps us pass on a belief system. You look at cave art and you immediately get the message. We hunt, we gather food, we must work together to survive. You put a superhero comic in a child's hands and they immediately feel we must never back down to the face of evil. These three icons sitting beside me credit narrative art as one of their biggest influencers. And we're here today because my dear friend George wanted to create a space where anyone could come and be inspired by the same art that inspired him. So let's get into it, shall we? George, what is narrative art to you, and when did you first fall in love with it?
Well, I've been collecting art since I was in college, and back when I was in college, which is sort of near the Stone Age, the idea is that I couldn't really afford real art. I love all art, no matter what it is, but I could afford comic art because in those days it was underground, and it was you sort of had to know people to get find out whether there was a sort of a auction that was sent out on a mimeograph sheet and had some prices and names of art. And so I've been sort of collecting narrative art ever since then, because I could then, in college, I could get an alley-oop for $30, and because the comics were expensive, but the original art wasn't that expensive because it was harder to come by.
And you managed to collect upwards of 40,000 pieces of art.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 50 years now, and then it occurred to me that what am I going to do with it all? Because I refuse to sell it. I'm not one of the typical high art collectors who buys and then you come back 5 years later and you say, what happened to that painting you bought? That was so beautiful. Well, I sold it for $10 million. I made a lot of money on it. I said, I could never do that. It's not what I think art is. I think it's more about I think it's more about a connection, an emotional connection with the work, not how much it cost or what celebrity did it or whatever. It's more a personal thing. And I don't think it's anything that anybody else can tell you. That's art. That's not art. It doesn't work that way. If you have an emotional connection, then it's art. If you don't, then just move on to the next painting. And it's the idea that people can tell you what art is and talk about it. I've discovered just from my experience of making movies and things that other people's opinions don't mean much. The only thing that really means something is what you do and what you feel about it, and then if you see that other people react to it in a very emotional way, then you say, well, I did my job, that was good. But when people come who say they're experts and they say, oh, that's not art, that's not this, that's tough. And I've worked with hundreds of illustrators in my life, and they're all brilliant, they're all great, but they don't get recognized for anything. So this is sort of a temple to the people's art.
Temple to the people's art. Guillermo, you have some feelings about narrative art as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the duty of art is twofold, is to hint at a mystery and provide eloquence and emotion. And I think that when you have those two things and you realize that there is, once photography enters the picture, a lot of the art that is figurative starts to be looked frowned upon a lot more historically. And yet you realize that it is an art that captures a moment and an emotion for many, many people, that is always able to express things that are not just propaganda once it's liberated from church and state. And particularly many of the pieces we have that celebrate freedom or anarchy, I mean, Crazy Cat, certainly. Comics were the first one to punch Nazis before movies. EC Comics had a lot of social conscience before or at the same time than movies and so forth. And you have graffiti, you have many of the popular mimeograph forms of art that do that. They are not dominated, and the museum, what is important for me or what is magical, is not a man and his collection, it's a lineage of images. A lineage of images that have been spoken, and we as storytellers and visual storytellers, we have that vocabulary to see where that thing came from, the etymology of that image. And when you think about that, you know, Noam Chomsky said, the limit of your language is the limit of your universe. If you cannot name something, you cannot own it. The same is true for images. And what is amazing about this collection, it will give you step by step how a form of expression came to inform what we are today. Because we are in a critical moment in which one of the things they like to disappear is the past. You know, and this is memorializing a popular, vociferous, expressive, and eloquent moment in our visual past that belongs to all of us, and the museum celebrates this.
You compared, yeah. You compared narrative art to rock and roll.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, if you have every institution, if you look for illustration museum or illustrated narrative art museums, they're tiny places here and there. The declaration of principle that the size, scope, and majesty of this building say is basically this exists as an art form, you know, and it changes so minutely. Everybody here can argue who inks Jack Kirby better, you know, Simon and Kirby or Royer and Kirby, and it changes. That's how much is important. The size of the building is a temple that says this is an important thing. This is declared an art. Imagine for a moment that all we had was classical music and non-melodic music, and rock and roll had never been enshrined in a proper way as an art form. This is what this is doing. It's saying this is rock and roll and it needs to be enshrined.
I landed at LAX the other day, which is LA's airport, and you're able to actually see this temple from the sky. It's unbelievable. But we'll talk about that later. I was just blown away. Doug, I would like to ask you about, because you have a very, very interesting viewpoint on how narrative art has impacted your life.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. I mean, I feel so incredibly honored to be here to celebrate narrative art. That's amazing. And I haven't shared this before, but I grew up loving comic books, and that's how I fell in love with art. And it's one of those things where it was surprising because growing up as a kid in Michigan, you know, art, narrative art, comic book art, magazine illustrations were kind of looked down upon, and it was kind of sad. But it was a way for me to enjoy art, and it invited me to discover more about art. And what I love about what George and Melody are doing in creating this museum is that it's celebrating and acknowledging and giving respect to an art form that has really, you know, haven't been highlighted before. I mean, I think it's really time to celebrate the artists who have, you know, committed their whole careers to creating this, because it is really hard. And what's terrific for me is that, you know, as an aspiring artist when I was young, I wanted to draw. And this gave me a portal into this world to discover more about it. And what's wonderful about the museum is that it describes all the variety of forms of narrative art. You have Charles Schultz Peanuts, you have Winsor McKay, you have heavy metal magazines, then you have Norman Rockwell and Frank Frazetta and Mobius. Those are all different avenues for a kid to enjoy art and to entice him to come in. One of the things that I found kind of sad though was that, you know, when I was growing up, art, comic book art wasn't taken seriously. It was always diminished. It was kind of like, okay, Doug, you'll outgrow that someday. And I'm so glad I didn't.
I'm glad you did it. This is so relatable. I'm sure that so many of you in the audience can relate to using your art form as a way to just express yourself. And I'm sure you're creating beautiful art right now, today, and here showing it to one another as we speak. Doug, you had a beautiful story about how you work with George. How you kind of start the process. Explain how this collaboration works.
I could talk all day about that. You know, one of the funny things is that growing up, well, first, I mean, I was painfully shy, so that's why I gravitated towards art. Words were never my strength. Visual images were, and so as a kid, I really drew art, and I wanted to learn more about, you know, how to create storytelling, story art. And my earliest forms were actually almost like silent movies, where I created panels, and it's very much like comic books. It's very much like what we're celebrating here. And one of the things that I kind of honed my skills growing up, because, you know, when I saw Star Wars, it was transformative for me because it opened up a whole world of people behind the scenes creating the art that I loved growing up. And this was never really exposed to me before, and that's why I think, you know, the museum is going to highlight a good portion of that. But what it did was it allowed me to start learning about art. I didn't go to art school, I'm self-taught, but I started to really find as many magazines as possible, and I honed my craft as best as I could. And I thought I was pretty competent, but then I started working with George. Honestly, that's when I realized I know nothing about design and art, narrative design and art. I knew about industrial design, I could do product designs, I could do cool spaceships, but that's not what narrative art is. Narrative art is driven by story. Story comes first, the art comes second. And it was one of the biggest lessons that I learned because, as you'll see in some of my early art on the prequels, they weren't very successful because I was designing in isolation, without context, you know. And part of it was because I didn't know what the story was. But the designs were always kind of presented as, you know, okay, like these are kind of individual items. And I was forgetting about the connection of how those designs fit into the overall picture of the story. Later on, you'll see that I slowly started to evolve because I started to take lessons from George where I learned, you know, those designs need history, they need context, and they need to fit within the scenes. So I started to present designs within the context of a scene. I started to invent the scenes to try to see and validate the designs. And it's one of those things that I learned from George where cinematic narrative design is very specific. It's story-driven.
Guillermo, you looking for him to jump in on that?
Well, no, I think that we all live design every day. If you design a wardrobe, think about your wardrobe. The same shirt, one button down, two buttons down, rolled, not rolled. A card says the way you dress, the way you move, everything you use tells something about your culture. What you favor is, you know, that has to be imbued in the design. But the most important thing right now, and the reason why we must defend this as an individual expression, is because there is one of the other things that I find oppressive is people saying you can do art with an app, and I'm sorry you can. You know, it's like you cannot just press a button and get to the middle, because then you will not know the beginning or the end of that idea for yourself. And when people say to you that they're saying, you know, art is not that important, but it is. It is. And I think the way he's talking about art and narrative is not the difference between eye candy and eye protein. Eye candy is an ornament, eye protein is nutritive. It's a story. That's the difference. And the difference is personality, knowledge, and emotion. Those are the three things that need to exist. And I'm sorry, they don't come in a fucking app.
Anything you'd like to add, George?
Well, this museum is dedicated to the idea that stories, mythology, any kind of story, that is written to affect people and to build community is extremely important to society and creating societies and creating community. Art illustrates that story, and that's the right hand of building a community. Is you need the art to make it seem real. Even back in the whether it's the Renaissance or the Stone Age, you'll always have a story that people believe it's mythology. It's not really true, but people believe it, and it binds them together with a common belief system. That common belief system is what is really important. And what we're doing here with the museum is to try to make people aware of the mythology that we live by, and at the same time, let them have an emotional experience looking at art that does tell the modern mythology. And as Doug pointed out, it's more of an exact science than people think it is, and it's a way. The art part of it is a way of making it really accessible to people and make it so they believe it.
I've heard you speak to that in our conversations a lot lately, and Guillermo, you just said the E word, and George said the E word. Y'all probably like, what the hell is the E word?
I also use the F word. I'm alphabetical.
Say as many F words as you want. But the connection that I can always hear, that I've constantly heard in just our various conversations, is emotion.
Yes.
An emotional connection that the art, evokes an emotion from you.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the most important things to never forget. I think when people step into this museum, they will be emotionally affected by it. They won't even have to get inside of it before they have an emotional connection to it, because it's just absolutely stunningly beautiful and intriguing, done differently than anything I've ever seen. But once they get inside, the things that they see, they will have an emotional connection to personally. And which to me, I think will endear everyone in this audience. So please make it your business to get to Los Angeles to check out the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. Another reason I think is also super important is because I was listening to you, Doug. I am the daughter of an art teacher. So I've watched so many of her students be shy people who were kind of introverted. Their parents may have been directing them in other directions for their professions, but they were gifted artists. And this art that they would do in the corner, not trying to pay attention quite to what was happening in class, one ear on, one off, was actually beautiful artwork that she could encourage them to continue to do. And they were gifted, very, very gifted, and just needed that to be developed. And so, I'm glad you didn't go become the engineer, doctor you were supposed to be. And you built us worlds instead. Thank you. Please don't stop doing that. Very important to continue to do that.
Yes.
But let me tell you again some of the things that are actually found inside the museum, if you just forgot. Very first, Flash Gordon. Very first character drawing from Flash Gordon from 1934. Original, as in you can see the smudges by all the hands that touched it on the way to getting produced. Never been on display before anywhere, ever. Original sketches from the Peanuts comics from the 50s and 60s. Who, my Charlie Brown? My Snoopy? What? Did y'all not love Lucy kicking the football? Exactly. Come on, the Great Pumpkin. With Sally sat in there all that time. We can go on this. Check this out. Drawn on board with graphite with little text taped to the top and editorial notes written on the side. It's amazing. Original drawings from Iron Man's first cover in 1968. Wow. And an original pen and ink splash of Black Panther from 1968. Now we can go on and on, but this leads me to my next question. George, you told me it was important for society to have a museum honoring these kinds of art pieces. Tell them that story about the Rockwell painting, the Thanksgiving one that you have. And, you know, I thought that was a lovely story.
Well, again, one of the things that we deal with is the history of illustration, because this really is about illustration and about the mythology that creates the stories, and the orators who, like in Greece, were highly respected above everybody because the stories were so important. And these are the things that we believe in. Some people believe in science, but science is an opinion. It's not real any more than stories are real. But the idea of the common mythology that we believe in today, like love and community, and all the things, we've got like 33, 40 different galleries, and those galleries all are illustrations of a particular mythology that we live with today. Whether it's love, whether it's work, whether it's, these are all not real, but it's an idea that gives us a common belief system. And a common belief system, you can't build anything. You can't build pyramids, you can't build palaces, you can't build airplanes, you can't do anything by yourself. You have to have people you can do it with. And one of the issues, ultimately, one is family, is that I believe, and I think most people believe, that most families are dysfunctional. You always have somebody in there who, okay, we'll kind of live with them a little bit, but, or her. But the thing about the Rockwell painting that she's talking about is that, you know, it's a group of paintings are called the Four Freedoms. One of them is the freedom from want. And what it is a painting of mom bringing in a turkey. And everybody's sitting around the table all smiling and looking, and you know, the idea that Uncle Jim is drunk over the quarter, or Sally and Billy are going to get divorced because they're having a huge argument. All that is not mentioned. But what it does say is the modern mythology is not that the Indians fed the pilgrims and saved them from starvation, because that would have gone away a long time ago. What it's really about is family. And people go to Thanksgiving and inevitably say, oh God, I don't want to do this again. You know, it's going to be fights, it's going to be this, you know, I have to deal with my dad, I have to do, you know, it's all kind of, oh, well, I guess I've got to. Well, you've got to because that painting tells you that family is important. It's part of what we need to keep society together, even if it's tough. And that's, a lot of the art centers around those ideas of what we believe in and how important that is to us to have a community and to be able to build off of a common belief. And it's especially together today because of the fact that the world is becoming a smaller place. There are a lot of different common beliefs out there. It used to be easy because they were far away and it was hard to get to the, you know, interact with that. But now, we're experiencing, in a lot of ways, the fact that there's a lot of different beliefs, and there's a lot that aren't common. And the society cannot exist without a common belief system. And that's where illustration is vital to show you what that means in everyday life.
Yeah. Around my way, they call that dropping knowledge. That's amazing. You know, I love the way you speak about it, because as much as you are able to inform us, and you just really took your time and informed us very clearly, it all comes back to love, it all comes back to emotion, it all comes back to a connection. It's very evocative. And honoring something, which kind of brings me back to the museum. Guillermo, you had very strong feelings about the museum as well, being about narrative art. George said something to me before that I'll share later, but there's something about the size and the scope and the design of this museum. What spoke that strongly to you to create this type of place for illustrators?
Well, one of the things we are facing very strongly right now, and probably more than ever or more than a long time, is that we realize stories shape the world. Stories that tell you the wrong thing about who you are or what you should be to other people. Because one of the narrative branches that is brutally applied is propaganda, you know. And I think the illustration art is not only celebrating the craft of incredible people that have designed movies and narrative art, like, you know, Ron Cobb, Ralph McQuarrie, you know, Mentor Hubner, James Steranko for Raiders and so forth, but it's also celebrating an emotional thing that belongs to all of us. Myth belongs to all of us. Propaganda is controlled by a very small group. And myth unites us, propaganda divides us. So if these things are enshrined in the principles that make this not, look, this is a museum where you're not going to have superimposed anybody's worth or value for the pieces. Like George says, you don't like it, move to the next one until one speaks to you. There is not an imposed value that this, you must like this. You know, Da Vinci said, to paint likeness is easy, to paint emotion is hard. And these are all very emotional pieces, and they celebrate things that belong to all of us. One of the reasons we are all here, one of the reasons is that popular mythology in forms of comic books of any kind, I don't care if you like underground comics or edgy comics that, you know, have nothing to do with genre, or you like a genre piece, is that we all can access those emotions. That's why they don't belong to the man, they don't belong to the power, they don't belong to our parents, they belong to us. And I think this is celebrating things that speak to all of us collectively but individually. So the size of the museum, again, declares this in existence in a way that is a singularity in the world right now. It's something that can celebrate that form of art.
did you have a thought?
Yes. No, I think what's remarkable about George is that he leads from the heart. And this museum is him. I mean, it's his gift to sort of help celebrate this. And what I really enjoy about it, honestly, is that narrative art is a way to educate kids and to sort of like validate and say it's okay to draw your fantasy, draw things from your mind, embrace comic books. It shouldn't be looked down upon. And what's fantastic is that I think the museum, my hope is that it will inspire the next Norman Rockwell or Frank Frazetta.
Yeah.
George?
What am I? What's the question?
I thought you were about to say
Huh?
something. I thought you were going to say something.
No.
I was going to let you. Let's talk a little bit about the actual details of the museum, because I found this very curious. The attention to detail. There are no right angles in the entire museum. Everything in the museum is curved. Tell me a little bit about that. What was the thought behind that? Yankson might have had, or did you
Well,
want that?
my life, when I started out, I wanted to be an architect, and then I realized that it actually involves a lot of math. And I decided that wasn't such a good idea. So then I went to building cars and racing cars, and almost got killed and decided that probably wasn't a good idea either. But then I went, and I didn't do that well in high school. So I decided, well, as I was in the hospital and recuperating from my car accident, I said, well, maybe I'll just go to junior college, and because this was during the Vietnam War, and there was a certain advantage to going to the college. So I went to college, and I liked social science. It was always very important to me. And so I decided I'd just take a lot of social science classes, because it really was something I was interested in. And I got really hooked on anthropology and fell under the sway of he was actually more of an English teacher, but at the same time he was really a mythologist, and somebody who really understood mythology, which I really was extremely interested in, and which really comes from a time when I was kind of 5 or 6 years old, and my mom would put me to bed, and I asked her a question, and I said, Mom, if there's only one God, why are there so many different religions? And she really couldn't answer that. But I spent the rest of my life trying to answer that, and I come to the conclusion that I believe in God, but I have no idea what God is, and I don't think anybody does, because that's the thing where a very, very human nature is that it is, when you're born, the baseline is fear. And as you go through life, you're curious about things, but you're especially curious about things you don't understand, and therefore that's a threat to you. And as a result, you make up stories to make it feel good. Well, what? It goes dark periodically. Why does it? What happens if the sun doesn't? It doesn't get day. It's just night. What happens if and back in the Greek times, they said, well, it's you got Apollo, he's a god, and he has a chariot, it's on fire, and when it goes over, flies over, it's all daytime. Yeah. At night, it's dark. Oh, I feel better now. And it's true. It's stories that make you feel connected to other people, but it also gets rid of some of the problems that you have about the fact that you have to know everything. And of course, one of the real problems we have is humans think they know everything, even though they don't know anything. They're very, if you take the universe, we know so little about what's going on that it's just, we're like ants. We have no knowledge whatsoever. We just think we do. And that's one thing that this kind of art will celebrate in a way, because we have science fiction. Science fiction is a myth. So we have made it real, but we've made it real because of science fiction books and art. And so that makes people say, oh, well, we could go to the moon, you know? And once that idea is implanted, then we sort of believe we can do it. But the real problem is, I say, we think, well, we can go to the moon, we can go anywhere. No, I don't think so. Everything is in elements that are so huge, so fast, so impossible to understand for a human being, that you can't depend on what we know, and you can't really, you can be inspired by what we think we know. But in the end,
Guillermo, you look like you want to get in there. What do you think?
Oh, I was no. I think it's the shape of the museum for me. What it is its flow, and what is beautiful is that we are. George is a collector. I'm a collector, but I know I don't own anything. I'm holding it briefly for the next person that is going to hold it or see it, because we are not eternal. What we hold and what we cherish is. That art will live longer than any of us. And the flow of the museum is like a movie strip. It's telling you that. It's just telling you, look, this is for you. And then you're going to bring the next thing. And it's going to continue. And you can drink from the same fountains of knowledge and image and content and power and myth that George and many, many others have been part of. And that continuum and that generosity is what makes a big difference, that the shape reflects that. And I think it says, look, this belongs to you, carry it with you, and keep moving forward. And that's what this type of art says. It's not, this is where it ends, this is the all of all alls, and you should be puny, but this is for you. You hold it for a moment, and you pass it on. And that happened to me with the fires. Came so close to my collection, I said, I'm going to start moving some of the stuff out. I draw the line at 3 houses full of stuff. I got to be a little one. And now that this museum exists, a lot of it may go there, because it's beautiful to share, and that's why we are here. We are here, I said the other day, you are in this world to be a host or a guest. If you're a guest, you will never be happy. If you're a host, you will always be happy to serve. And this museum is hosting that type of art, and it's a continuum that belongs to all of us.
Well, I hate to tell you guys, but we are out of time. No. But I know so many questions. But are y'all pumped up for this museum now or what? I want to thank George Lucas. Would like to thank Guillermo del Toro. And I want to congratulate Doug for having a museum made just for him, the illustrators, courtesy of the men to his right and many, many more, including Melanie Hobson. So thank you so much for having us today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Put your hands together one more time.